Hi, it's Mark Kelly here. You might know me from my regular gig as co-host of the CBC's The Fifth Estate. You'll be hearing more from me when I fill in for Matt as he crosses the country talking to Canadians about the election. I hope you tune in, and please enjoy the current podcast. In the fall of 2021, owners of a cryptocurrency platform called Index Finance realized they were under attack. Someone was buying crypto at an enormous discount that essentially tricked the platform into giving them tokens on the cheap. The owners eventually found the alleged culprit, an 18-year-old math prodigy from Hamilton, Ontario, named Andean Medjedovic. But they were already out more than $16 million. 2 years later, he allegedly struck again, this time at a different crypto platform. In total, Medjedovic is accused of fraudulently acquiring $65 million of crypto assets. Alexandra Posadzki has been following the story closely. She's the financial and cybercrime reporter with the Globe and Mail, and she joins me in our Toronto studio. Alex, good morning.
Good morning.
So who is this Andean Medjedovic?
Well, essentially, when this all started, he was a teenager from Hamilton who is extremely gifted at mathematics. He had done his high school. It looks like he finished high school in about a year and then was not even 15 years old when he started his undergrad in pure mathematics at the University of Waterloo. Wow. Breezed through that in 3 years, then had his master's degree, which only took him a year by the time he was 18 and starting to perform allegedly these exploits on these decentralized finance platforms.
Well, tell us about that transformation from going this math prodigy whiz kid into an alleged crypto thief.
Well, it looks like he got some practice on these techniques through this sort of coding competition called Code Arena, where essentially participants would practice finding these vulnerabilities in the code of these decentralized finance platforms, and you could win prizes. And he did. He actually placed in 2 of these contests, and that seems to have occurred shortly before the first alleged exploit that he took part in.
It's a complex world, cryptocurrency. So what do we know about how he allegedly pulled off the first attack back in 2021?
So according to this indictment that was unsealed by the U.S., what he essentially did was he took out a flash loan, which in the sort of decentralized finance world is an uncollateralized loan in which the assets are borrowed and then repaid within the same series of transactions. And it's a massive loan, $157 million U.S. in borrowed assets. And then using those borrowed assets, he executes this complex sequence of trades that essentially manipulates token prices in 2 of Index Finance's liquidity pools. And through all of those transactions, he's able to essentially transfer out $16.5 million U.S. of digital tokens into his own wallet.
So when Index Finance leaders figured out what had happened, according to your reporting, they made him an offer. Tell us about that.
So they essentially sent him this email, and it was kind of like, through gritted teeth, good job. Give us back the money. You can keep 10% as what's known as a bug bounty. We can pretend that this was all sort of staged as, a white hat hacking sort of a transaction. And then you can go off and start your career as a white hat hacker. And Andean, who goes by Andy, decided not to take that offer and essentially at that point went into hiding.
Did he explain why he didn't take the offer?
So we don't know exactly why he didn't take the offer, but he did have some sort of cryptic tweets that he posted online at the time that gave kind of a hint into his mentality, his thinking. And it seems, he sort of hints, he doesn't overly state this, but it seems that he believes in this controversial philosophy in the world of decentralized finance known as code is law. And the idea behind code is law is that essentially if there's sort of a weakness or a vulnerability in the code and you as a trader are able to manipulate that vulnerability into giving you crypto at highly favorable to you terms, then those coins or tokens are, lawfully gotten. Essentially, you deserve them because you were smart enough to outwit the code. The code is the law. The regular law doesn't apply.
And I want to talk more about code is law, but first he strikes again more recently. I mean, was similar situation? Was he's applying his same principles and exploiting a weakness in another platform? Is that how he did it the second time?
Exactly. So roughly 2 years later, he does a very, very similar thing on a platform called Kyberswap. And this time he makes off with 48.4 million US. So an even larger windfall. And
he hasn't been too bashful or too quiet about his exploits. What has he been saying online about what he's done?
So he says things like, you were out-traded. There's nothing you can do about that, such as crypto. And, after the indexed exploit, he says, if they want to resort to name calling, LOL. I didn't do anything wrong is kind of the implication of what he's saying. And he's also occasionally surfaced and spoken to reporters. I spoke to him. He also spoke to Bloomberg at one point, and he told them that he wasn't too concerned about getting a job because waging in a cage was not his idea of a good life. And, ironically, I suppose, he did actually at one point, he told me, end up in a cage. That means he was arrested in some country in Europe, he told me. He did not say what country that was. And after, I think he said hundreds of days, they actually released him and decided not to extradite him to the United States for some reason.
Okay. How did you get in touch with him in the first place, or somebody who claims to be him? How did that come about?
So because he was in hiding, the courts were using email to serve him with legal documents, and they were sending these documents to several email addresses. They were all disclosed in the court filing. So I just kept on emailing him over and over again until finally he got in touch and said, or someone claiming to be him responded to one of my emails and said, I can try to answer some of your questions on Signal. And so we had a chat on Signal.
And I know it's a limited exchange and hard to read into every word, but did you get any sort of idea of the profile, the character of the individual?
I mean, he did use some sort of racist slurs in describing his fellow inmates. And he also, talked about the previous U.S. administration as the liberals. He was like, the worst thing that's come out of this is the liberals have all my stuff, meaning, I think his computer and his phone was actually sent off to the U.S. and he now wants to get them back. He was sort of an interesting guy to talk to. He said things like, things didn't go exactly as planned, but then he didn't really want to elaborate on what the plan had been. He did also say that getting arrested was not the worst of all possible outcomes, but still not great, and described the whole thing as being pretty terrible.
So let's go back to Code is Law. So Code is Law because he's basing the fact that he's obtained these assets, that they are his because he outsmarted the platforms, so therefore they belong to him. Is there any law to the idea of Code is Law?
I mean, the analogy that often gets trotted out is this idea of high-frequency trading. So the idea is if, one hedge fund is able to sort of exploit a pattern in another hedge fund's trading and profit off of it, then nothing illegal has happened. Essentially, that's just like the risk of playing the game of being a high-frequency trader. In terms of actual law, I mean, this has never been tested in Canada, which is why this case was so interesting had it actually gone to court in Canada, as it would have been the first legal case to test the Code is Law theory here. It did get tested in the U.S., which is actually where Andy has been indicted, in a case called Mango Markets, where the trader actually ended up being convicted. And he had made a similar argument, or it was at least part of his argument, was that he hadn't hacked Mango Markets. He had just exploited a vulnerability, and the court actually ended up sentencing him to jail. So it did not stand up there.
Was there any possibility or pursuit of actually indicting him here in Canada?
There was a civil court process. So there was a large investor in Indexed who had actually gone to court and tried to sue him. And then separately, the Indexed finance co-founders had launched a separate suit. Those lawsuits sort of ended up becoming combined. And he did sort of seem like he was willing to participate early on in the process. But then he just kind of went AWOL, and there was an arrest warrant out for him, but he was never located here. By the time the large investor in Indexed got a civil search warrant and the lawyers showed up to search Andy's parents' home, he was already gone.
And what do his parents know about his whereabouts, or what are his parents sharing about their son's whereabouts?
They've generally said that they're not in touch with him and that they don't know where he is. The judge in that case has said that he doesn't necessarily find that credible. There was one voicemail where Andy's father did say he had been in touch with him, but he also sort of hinted that Andy might commit suicide if people sort of come after him. I understand from some of the statements his father made that Andy was getting death threats as well. And so this is, an 18-year-old boy who's done something that is being, or allegedly done something that, he's taking a lot of heat for, and he's, potentially getting death threats from investors. And so his father said something about how, like, he may commit something that you're all going to regret, and then I won't have my child anymore, and none of you will have the money because nobody else knows how to get it.
Well, tell us, the crypto world is a bit of the Wild West, and sometimes people who behave like this are seen as sort of heroic outlaws. So how are people in the crypto world seeing him in this whole story unfold?
I think watching with fascination. When I did go through old tweets and stuff, I did see there were some people who were expressing support for him. But then there are also people who really are just not buying this whole code is law thing. They're like, no, this is market manipulation. Because, at the end of the day, there are investors, right, in these platforms whose tokens effectively, became worth a lot less. And so they feel like they've been robbed, like something has been taken from them. And so there is a real tension, I think, in the crypto world about how much the law should apply and when and where. And some of the cynics would say, crypto is supposed to be this kind of lawless place. And then as soon as you get had, then all of a sudden now you want the police involved. And so there's accusations of hypocrisy. And so this has always been a sort of source of tension, is like, when to get the courts involved and when to get the police involved.
And like anything these days, every story has to have a Trump angle.
Yes, of course.
And this one does. From your exchange with him, as you've been going back and forth communicating with him or someone who claims to be him on Signal, what did he mention about Trump?
Well, he said the silver lining to all of this was that he's hopeful his whole case may get thrown out because Trump has promised to stop the persecution of crypto people. And indeed, we have seen U.S. regulators sort of walking back from a lot of crypto enforcement cases. And so there is some truth to that. He actually said that half of the people who are involved in his case are no longer there. That being said, what I have read most recently is that, there is a desire to kind of pull back from doing regulatory cases against the owners of crypto exchanges, but regulators are still looking to go after people who are involved in theft. And so I guess if you define this case as a theft, then Andy may not be off the hook. It's, hard to read the tea leaves here.
Very quick last word on reading the tea leaves. Do you think this guy's going to be caught?
He already got arrested and let go. And so I think he knows where to go, where there isn't maybe such a broad extradition treaty with the United States. So if he's smart and he keeps his wits about him, maybe not.
The mystery continues. Alex, great story, great reporting.
Thanks for having me.
Alexandra Posadzki is the financial and cybercrime reporter with the Globe and Mail.